Hey everyone, for those just joining us, this is Preston Clark with LawRoom. We're going to wait, we're going to wait till 2 after, and it is now 2 after, so we're officially going to get started. I'm very excited to have so many folks on. We have about 150 who are now in attendance, so we'll be very respectful of the next 60 or 58 minutes of your time. And I suspect a lot of folks will continue to pour in over the next 5 minutes. So first of all, I want to thank the audience. I want to thank everyone for joining us today, joining Lauren and I. We have the breakdown of registrants. We have HR professionals, we have general counsels, we have CEOs, VPs of HR, CHROs, very broad and eclectic audience. About half of the audience is California-based, and the other half is spread out all across the U.S. So this will be a presentation that is relevant to all. I think LawRoom, since we're based in California and we have about half of our client base is in California, I think that explains the disproportionate distribution there. But it's certainly not content focused in that respect. So in terms of the logistics for the webinar today, I'm sure most of you have been on a webinar before. You've been on GoToWebinar, so you know the rules of the game. We'll be accepting questions throughout. So in the right sidebar where it says GoToWebinar Control Panel, you're welcome to submit questions for Lauren as we go through today. If the question is relevant in the moment, we'll interrupt and answer it. If it's something that can be addressed at the end, we'll do that as well. If we don't have time to get to all questions, we'll certainly address those via email afterwards today. Most common questions are, will the slides that Lauren is presenting on be distributed? They will in fact be distributed, and you'll have those in your inbox tomorrow, along with a recording of the event. So with that, let me dive into the introduction of Lauren Russell. First, let me give sort of a contextualized introduction. Lauren wrote a very, very good article in Law Practice Today in October, or at least it was published in October, entitled "Changing the Script on Anti-Harassment Training." And here at LawRoom, our core business is conduct training, and we have, the majority of our customers also use us for anti-harassment and discrimination training, and a lot of the running conversations we have internally and ultimately externally relate to the quality of that education. And I think it's been, everyone knows the importance of anti-harassment and discrimination, and yet we've lowered the bar in terms of the qualitative delivery of that, which seems a bit at odds. So when I read this article that Lauren wrote, it really caught my attention, and I just want to read I don't want to take any wind out of your sail, Lauren, but I want to read the ending of that article because I thought it was particularly engaging and relevant to what we're going to be talking about today. Sexual harassment training has become a bit of an ongoing joke, but it's time to change the script. Harassment claims are easy to bring and difficult to defend against. An employer's best bet is to have a strong anti-harassment policy that is backed up with regular training that addresses all types of harassment in a real and meaningful way. And I know that's a simple concept, but I think, and it's probably even more simple for the 180 folks that are on this webinar right now, because you wouldn't be spending this time if you didn't know how important this is to your organization. But we also know that by and large, how organizations have historically approached conduct training, harassment training in particular, it's a bit of a joke and it's not taken seriously. And that juxtaposed against the severity of what happens when it's not done properly is always struck me as quite odd. And so to have someone like Lauren present for us today on why it's so important to take it seriously and how to take it seriously is a thrill for us at LawRoom, and I'm sure it's why we have such an amazing audience and large audience on today. So with that, let me give the more formal introduction of Lauren. Lauren is an associate at Young, Conway, Stargate, and Taylor, based in Wilmington, Delaware. She represents employers on a broad range of issues relating to compliance with local, state, and federal employment laws, in constitutional provisions. In addition to litigation, Lauren counsels employers on a variety of topics, including revisions of handbooks and related policies to ensure compliance with state and federal employment and labor statutes. Lauren also conducts on-site training on legal compliance and, of course, anti-harassment training. Lauren speaks regularly at various employment law issues. Lauren is active in the legal community, serving as editor of the Delaware Employment Law Letter, the chair of the Delaware State Bar Association's Labor and Employment Section, and a member of the Delaware Federal Bar Association's Executive Committee. I got it out. Lauren, is great to have you here today.
Thank you very, very much, Preston. I'm thrilled to be here.
And I just, before we go, since we had such so many of you showed up just in the last couple of minutes, I just want to say, for those who are going to ask the questions, slides will be distributed afterwards. We are recording the event. That'll also be distributed. And without further ado, Lauren, if you're ready, I'd like to pass the controls over to you so we can get started.
Please do.
All right.
Okay, are you seeing my screen at this point?
I'm almost seeing your screen. Give me 1 second.
Okay.
Okay, I believe I just passed it to you, so let me know if you can see if you had a notification.
Let's see. I do not have a notification. And I'm still seeing your screen.
Okay, give me 1 second. Sorry, everyone. Give me 1 second. We'll complete this handoff.
Ah, there we go. Okay. Okay, do you see me?
Yes, you are live.
Outstanding. Okay, thank you for being so patient. This is a shot of our beautiful building in downtown Wilmington, which is about as close as most Americans get to the state of Delaware unless you drive through our 11-mile stretch of I-95. But it's a beautiful city. I encourage you to visit and look me up if you are in town. But today we are going to tackle not the issues of beautiful downtown Wilmington, but workplace harassment. Preston mentioned that he did pick up an article that I wrote a couple of months ago, and I wrote it while I was out of the office on maternity leave, watching a tremendous amount of television, and sort of having my memories pinged by some of the scenes that I was watching. This is a scene from a television show called Gilmore Girls, which inspired this article. I am told that it may not be very effectively for you all, but I can assure you it's hilarious, and I will sort of give you a rundown on what happens as soon as it's done. It's very, very brief.
Okay, now next on the agenda is something very exciting. The Dragonfly is first official sexual harassment demo.
Finally, yes, good talk to them.
Sexual harassment is bad, so no one touch anyone in any funny places unless specifically asked.
That's it. That's the seminar. We have this speech about people not only like to desire, but they way some people walk with all around. It is natural. Because we broke up and
someone touch Michelle. Moving on.
Okay, so here we have a new business getting off the ground, a substantial number of employees, by the way, in attendance at this meeting, and we have a business owner who is doing everything wrong. I am a huge fan of Lorelai Gilmore. I think she's hilarious, but she is an awful, awful anti-harassment trainer. And you would be surprised by how many of the aspects of that video clip I have seen come up in my client practices. So what's going on here? First of all, it's not the 1990s.
Lauren, let me just interrupt for 1 second. I know we're having some audio issues that we weren't having during the audio test. And so did you change, are you doing something differently than you were 15 minutes ago?
I am doing nothing differently.
So it's just whatever can go wrong is going wrong. So we'll monitor the sound as we go here, and so I know that that's kind of going in and out. So hopefully it'll get back on track. But if nothing has changed at your end, then it may just be a glitch that sorts its way out.
Okay. So with regard to our sacrificial lambs here, the Fillmore girls, as I was saying, it's not the 1990s anymore. Harassment is not about the Anita Hill testimony. This is not just about some, senior male manager touching a subordinate female in an inappropriate manner. The thing that we all need to remember that is so important is that harassment is an expansive topic. Much more than sexual harassment claims these days, I see race harassment. We see a fair amount of sexual orientation harassment, but remember that any characteristic that's protected under local, state, or federal law is going to be a possible subject of a harassment claim. So those are your federal provisions: race, color, religion, sex, national origin, age, disability, genetic information under GINA. In Delaware here, we then give additional protections for pregnancy. We have a specific pregnancy statute that is not just part of our general anti-discrimination provisions. Gender identity, sexual orientation, marital status, your status, believe it or not, as a volunteer emergency responder, and your status as a victim of domestic violence. All of those things can land you in a lawsuit if you've got one employee joking around with another employee. So our first problem is that Lorelei Gilmore has only engaged in sexual harassment training. Her second problem, which we will get to later, is that it is clearly responsive to the complaints of a single employee instead of being a general training program. And then last but not least, she's not even responding to the actual complaints. He's saying they're making fun of my bounce and sway, and she's saying, don't touch him. Well, and in all aspects, frankly, this is, an example of what we aspire not to do. So, what are our goals here? I mean, ideally, what I would like to do for you is create a workplace where you don't have any charges of discrimination and you never face a harassment lawsuit. And so we'll talk about how to accomplish that when you're dealing with reasonable individuals. Reasonable individuals who understand the investigation process and feel like their complaints were heard and investigated are much less likely to file a lawsuit or file a charge of discrimination. But anybody who has worked in human resources knows that there's always a Looney Tune who's going to sue you no matter what. So our second goal, if we can't avoid the lawsuit, is to be fully prepared to defend the inevitable suit that happens when, Mr. Crazy Pants, comes after you because of something that he never told you about or that you investigated and was completely unsubstantiated. So those are our goals as we work through this. So at the most fundamental level, let's talk about what it is that we're dealing with here. Harassment has become, in my opinion, a fairly meaningless term. I have a lot of clients call me and say, Susie in accounting is complaining that she's being harassed. She says her manager, issued her discipline. And I say, all right, well, what's the allegation of harassment? Well, she was issued discipline. Well, that's not harassing. The fact that, a subordinate doesn't like the way that they're being treated by a manager is not in and of itself harassment. So what are we really concerned with here? The first is our 1990s definition. It's quid pro quo harassment. It means this for that, and it's when a person in a position of power forces a subordinate to suffer through unwanted behavior in exchange for a benefit. So that benefit, and the reason benefits is in quotes, is because, you know, a lot of times these are not benefits. This is, you know, I'm going to sexually harass you, and if you complain, I'll fire you. Well, that's not much of a benefit to me, not getting fired. I'm actually legally entitled not to be fired under these circumstances. But the person in the position of power is absolutely getting some kind of personal benefit. Again, is it really personal? You know, usually these people are, you know, asking for benefits from a whole lot of people. So I will tell you that in my 7 years of practice, I have never seen a quid pro quo case. These cases almost never come up because we went through the Anita Hill testimony, and, you know, most people know not to say something stupid to a subordinate. There is the stray manager who still engages in, you know, old-fashioned harassment, but it's very unusual. What are we more concerned with? My much bigger concern for all employers out there is hostile work environment harassment. So this consists of 4 elements. It's unwanted conduct because of your membership in a protected category. So I am listening to inappropriate jokes, that's unwanted conduct, that are directed at me because of my race, or because I am a woman, or because I am gay. And then that conduct has to be severe or pervasive. I'm not being, you know, I'm not listening to a single joke and winning a harassment claim. I'm listening to inappropriate comments every single day for a year. Alternatively, it has to be severe. So I was sexually assaulted in the workplace. Any type of an assault will automatically be considered severe. And then, you know, the last element is that there has to be a basis for what the courts call respondeat superior liability. That means that the employer must have known about it. Now, if one of your managers is doing the harassment, there is liability there, period, because your manager is considered to be acting on behalf of the company. If it is subordinates harassing each other, so, you know, I am an associate attorney, one of my other associate attorneys is, you know, sending me inappropriate jokes via email. You know, I find that offensive, and it's because I'm a woman. In that case, I have to do something to make sure that my employer is aware of the harassment. I have to make a complaint. But, you know, accepting that these, you know, that this is the outline of hostile work environment harassment, and that we can fight, you know, as an attorney, I could fight for you and say this wasn't unwelcome conduct, or my client didn't know about it. I always recommend to my clients that you treat harassment claims the way that you treat disability claims. And that is to say that when I face a disability claim, I assume the individual is disabled. When I face a harassment claim, I assume that the elements of harassment are there. I don't want to have to fight about whether, you know, are 3 jokes severe or pervasive? What about 5 jokes? Is that severe or pervasive? What about 15 inappropriate jokes? You know, these are all questions of fact that are very difficult to deal with. So, you know, what I would like to do is, you know, instead create a work environment where employees feel heard and we can avoid these claims to start with. So, you know, why do we want to avoid them? Harassment claims are moving targets and they're very difficult to defend. You know, as I said in the excerpt of the article that Preston read, you know, this is a tricky case. It is almost as tricky as a disability claim where I am forced by law to assume that somebody is disabled. First, because there's no intent required. If I tell a dumb blonde joke in the workplace, and I think as I said, I'm hilarious. All of you should be aware of that. I'm a very funny person. All of my clients tell me so. And so I'm telling this dumb blonde joke, and I think that, you know, I'm being very, very funny. Everybody should laugh at this dumb blonde joke. It doesn't matter that I am doing it out of the goodness of my heart. In fact, you know, I'm a woman, and clearly I don't have any problems with other women. And, you know, I give all of the defenses I want, but if one of my blonde coworkers listens to this and thinks that I'm targeting her because she's a woman, or that I think that she's somehow stupid or less intelligent because she's a woman, my intent is completely irrelevant. And so I'm in a position where I have to get what's in the head of, the recipient of the joke. We have to take their word for it. I never want to be in a position where I have to take the plaintiff's word for something. Our next problem is frequently harassing conduct didn't appear unwelcome at the time. Again, this is the joke in the workplace where, I'm telling a dumb blonde joke to a circle of other employees, and every single one of them laughs. But you know who's laughing on the outside and not on the inside? My blonde subordinate who's listening to this joke and thinking, she thinks I'm stupid. She thinks I'm stupid because I'm a woman. And if I have to listen to one more dumb blonde joke, I'm going to go file a lawsuit. And so, I'm in a position where, first of all, I didn't mean to be offensive. And second of all, she laughed at my joke. It was hilarious. Everybody tells me I'm funny. And that doesn't matter. It is completely irrelevant that the individual laughed while I was telling that joke, because inside she was feeling very differently. In addition, and one of the things we're going to talk about when we talk about effective training is that your managers are a huge liability problem. As I said, when we're talking about the elements of a harassment claim, one of the things that an employee has to prove is that the company knew about the harassment and didn't do anything to stop it. Well, if you have a single manager who knows about this, then your company can be on the hook. And the way this usually happens is that you have a manager and a subordinate who are buddies. It's always two friends in the workplace. And the subordinate says to the manager, who is, by the way, her best friend, and they went out and watched 50 Shades of Grey on Saturday, and they had 3 Cosmos, and, it was the best time of their lives, and they started talking about work. And the subordinate said, God, Bob in accounting will not stop sending me, sexual jokes. And he asks me out every single Friday, and it makes me so uncomfortable. And the manager says, oh, yeah, everybody knows about Bob. Well, we're off to the races, and you've got to, because your manager, A, knows about it, and B, knows that this is a continuing problem. But you know who doesn't know that there is a continuing problem? Anybody in the human resources department. So what happens is your manager hears that they don't think this is a complaint of sexual harassment. They think, yeah, I hate the way Bob looks at me too. And nobody complains, higher up the scale. And so, you end up with a lawsuit on your hands that's very difficult to defend because your manager didn't do the right thing. So the last reason that these claims are extremely difficult is because the allegations aren't static. You are forced to play whack-a-mole in a harassment suit. So again, let's imagine that we've got a situation where one employee is telling, inappropriate jokes, dumb blonde jokes, or racial jokes in the workplace. Well, in the complaint that I receive after a lawsuit is filed, it lists 3 incidents in which an inappropriate joke was told. And I think, this is great. I can win this case. There are only 3 allegations. That is not severe or pervasive. I am going to win this case for my client. Well, then I take the plaintiff's deposition. And lo and behold, there are 15 more jokes that were told. And I say, is that everything? And the employee says, yes, that's everything I can remember right now. Well, then I start interrogatory requests. And in addition to the 3 things in the complaint and the 15 other jokes that I learned about in deposition, in response to the interrogatories, there are 20 other examples of when somebody, gave this employee the side eye. And, you will note that these incidents did not happen last week when people will remember them and I can, ask questions about them. They started 6 years ago. And I'm asking questions of employees, I'm at your location, taking interviews, and asking employees about things that happened 6 years ago. And invariably, the response is, I have no idea. I don't know if that happened. I don't know if Bob in accounting told an inappropriate racial joke 6 years ago. I don't think so, because that would be offensive, but I don't remember. And so for all of those reasons, avoiding these claims and, moving the discussion is one of the most valuable things that, any human resources manager can do. This is one of the places that I really think that human resources managers are a huge value added to their organizations, because you are the thing that stands between your company and the scenarios that I have just laid out.
Hey, Lauren?
Uh-huh.
We have a couple of questions coming in relating to burden of proof.
Yes.
as it relates to use the terminology in one of the questions, the offended individual?
Well, the burden of proof depends on the circumstances. So when we are within the walls of the business, you're not in court, so there's no burden of proof. But when we are within the walls of a business, the employee's burden is very minimal. All they need to do is put you on notice of these allegations, and at that point, you have an affirmative obligation to investigate. And the reason that responsibility rests on the employer is that the employer has access to all of the key information, the documents, the individuals, phone recordings, those sorts of things. In court, the burden absolutely rests with the plaintiff. He has to present evidence that meets those elements, but you are dealing again with, in many cases, a burden shifting analysis. So keep in mind that claim is real, at its root, a disparate treatment claim. So I'm saying I'm being treated differently, as a result of my race or my age or my sex. And the way that I'm being treated differently is that I am subject to this harassment that is so severe or pervasive that it's altering the conditions of my employment. So, I'm forced to suffer under this burden. I get the burden of proof, but there's a shifting burden of production. So the employer has to present evidence in defense of its position, evidence that it had a policy in place, that it investigated the allegations, that it took remedial action. Those are all ways in which the employer has some responsibility to present evidence in those cases.
Great, and for that, for those of you who asked the question that relates to that, the burden of proof, if that was, if you were looking for a different answer, if you want us to go deeper, that's something we can certainly take offline, and I'll put you in contact with Lauren on that. So thanks for those questions.
Absolutely, it's a great question. Throughout this presentation, I'm going to talk about the employer's responsibility to do all of these things, and that's because from my position, when we are fighting a charge of discrimination or engaging in litigation, we will it's always our practice to be proactive. We don't want to rely on the employee to bring out all of the evidence because they're not going to get all of the stuff that's good for us. So let's talk about what that is. As I said earlier, there's no stopping a lawsuit. So how do we build both a workplace that is resistant to claims, but when you get the claim, how do we really strong case to defend ourselves? Let's assume that harassment has actually occurred. What do you do about it? And that's what we're going to talk about today. That's really your strongest defense. We assume that 3 jokes told over the course of 5 years was severe or pervasive. Let's give the employee that assumption. But we responded in a responsible way. We stopped the harassment, and that is your best defense. So how do we stop it? Your first line of defense is your sexual harassment policy. And I've already made a misstatement. It's not a sexual harassment policy. You should have an anti-harassment policy that prohibits harassment on the basis of any protected characteristic. As I said, I see very few sexual harassment claims. What I do see are race harassment claims, African American employees alleging that there were, believe it or not, in this day and age, they allege that somebody hung a noose in a workplace. We have seen that. We have seen harassment on the basis of sexual orientation. So calling somebody a slur for gay, making fun of somebody's clothing and their hair because, it makes them, quote unquote, look gay. Those kinds of things, come up much more frequently than traditional sexual harassment. So have a general harassment policy. Review that policy every year. Here in the state of Delaware, employment law changes so quickly that it is a full-time job to keep up, and in fact, that is why people pay their labor and employment attorneys, because that's all we do is keep up with these changes. So to the extent that your state laws change, and now you protect on the basis of gender identity, for example, if your state prohibits discrimination against transgender employees, harassment policy. For those in-between times, so every time there's a change in the law, you don't need to rush and change your policy. Do it once a year. In the interim, rely on general language, which says, you know, we prohibit discrimination and harassment on the basis of sex and orientation and gender and age and on and on and on, and any other category protected by law. So always have that catch-all language. Next, there should be a clear reporting procedure in your handbook. If you are the victim of sexual harassment, you have an obligation to report that harassment to a manager. You can report to any manager. We prefer that you report to the Chief Human Resources Officer. If the Chief Human Resources Officer is the alleged perpetrator, or if for any other reason you do not feel comfortable reporting to the CHRO, you can report to the following 1, 2, 3, 15 people. That is what I like to see in a policy, because then if an employee failed to report the alleged harassment, I can say, you know, you had every opportunity. All you had to do was open your mouth to any manager in the company, and you didn't do that, did you? No, I didn't. Why didn't you do that? Well, you know, and it really stymies a plaintiff. So that is an incredibly important provision.
Hey, Lauren. I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's an interesting question that just came in, and it relates to Latin American employees, and as someone who's lived in Central America and lived in Spain and lived in Miami, I'm sensitive to that. I certainly understand the complexity of those issues, and the question that's coming in is when the allegations of harassment stem from some probable cultural misunderstandings in terms of similarities and difference between different Latin American countries based on, you know, the countries they're from and the cultures and the origins. The very simple question is, are those harassment claims valid?
So that's a difficult question to answer because I don't know what the exact allegations are. If it is Bob in accounting who, in a very well-meaning way, says, oh, you know, I love Sally, she's, you know, from Mexico, and she's actually from Guatemala, and Bob in accounting cannot for the life of him remember that Sally is from Mexico or from Guatemala and not Mexico, those kinds of things are not generally going to rise to the level of harassment because, you know, somebody's not being targeted because of their, you know, their membership in a protected category or their national origin in this case. It's just Bob in accounting being, you know, a bit of a jerk unintentionally. If, however, you know, you've got somebody, you know, who is engaging in a discussion about, you know, sort of cultural stereotypes. For example, you know, somebody saying, you know, all Mexican men are macho and, you know, they want to rule the house. Well, those kinds of comments, you know, are not somebody, you know, being sort of misinformed. They are absolutely stereotypes that are going to create problems. And so, you know, a lot of it depends on the circumstances. But yes, cultural misunderstandings, assumptions about people from a particular location can absolutely be harassing. You know, if I could think of any number of stereotypes about people from any particular country, including Americans. If you have a foreigner in your workplace and he says, you know, God, all Americans are so loud and rude and abrasive, you know, if your foreign employee keeps repeating those comments, that could absolutely be seen as harassing by a subordinate. And when that subordinate doesn't get a promotion, you know, he's going to say, well, you know, my manager in Sweden didn't promote me because I'm American. He promoted, you know, an Indian employee instead. And so I suffered harassment and an adverse employment action. So yes, it can be. Cultural stereotypes can absolutely be harassing. But I need a little bit more information to you know, give a firm answer on whether, you know, it's problematic or not under the circumstances.
Great.
Okay. So the last thing that I want to see in your policy, as we're, you know, sort of talking about our first line of defense to a lawsuit, is that I don't want you over-promising. If your policy includes these are my two greatest offenders. We will begin an investigation into, any allegations within 5 days, and the investigation will be conducted by the chief executive officer. These are the kinds of things that do not lend themselves to flexibility. Harassment policies need to be flexible, because if your chief human resources officer is your normal investigator, and that is the person who is accused of misconduct, they cannot investigate allegations against themselves. It's absolutely, it cannot happen. So you need to have flexibility built into your policy. So, anything that says we will, begin or complete an investigation within, X number of days, big problem. What if your alleged harasser is on a 2-week vacation? You can't begin an investigation, in any real sense without, having a very early discussion with the alleged harasser. So that's an issue. What about it's completely confidential? Harassment claims cannot be completely confidential. What we like to do is indicate that they will be kept confidential to the extent consistent with a full and fair investigation. And the reason that is because I've got to tell Bob in accounting who he's supposed to have harassed, and in what ways he's supposed to have harassed that person. I can't promise my complaining party that I'm going to keep it confidential, because Bob can't do somebody, I won't tell you who, has complained that you have harassed them in a manner in which I cannot disclose. Bob can't defend himself from that. And I can't do a real investigation. How am I supposed to talk to witnesses about that? It's just impossible. So what I like to see is to the employee that we will disclose as little as possible, and I will protect you from retaliation. What your employee is concerned about here is not so much confidentiality usually, but retaliation. They don't want to be looked at differently, targeted because they made a complaint. So that's the approach. And by the way, if you have a policy on the books that violates these sort of general provisions, I'm certain that Preston can give you my email address. I will gladly send you a general policy with absolutely no expectation of compensation or work in the future. I just like to see really strong anti-harassment policies in people's handbooks. I am glad to share one if you violate some of our core tenets.
I will make sure that your email gets distributed for those interested, Lauren. That's great. Thank you.
Great. No problem. Okay. So now let's assume we've got a really strong policy in place. It's flexible. It provides safety for employees, but it's not, too specific. What do we do now? Follow the policy. This is my second great struggle with clients, is that, they have a really great policy in place, which I drafted for them, and it's wonderful, and it meets all of my requirements, and is the salvation that everybody hoped for, and then they ignore the policy. So that is, a real shot in the foot, and I will tell you that every plaintiff out there is going to use that against you. It is not a strong legal argument, but it really appeals to people. I don't want a jury listening to this case and hearing, well, they were supposed to investigate my complaint, but they didn't. Or they were supposed to interview all of the people I identified in my complaint, but they didn't. That's a big problem. So what do we do in terms of following our policy? Remember that even though you should not have a specific timeline in place, timing is essential. You need to conduct this investigation as quickly as reasonably possible. If the alleged harasser is out of the country for a 2-week vacation, then you have to wait for 2 weeks, at least until you can complete the investigation. But if everybody is available to you and you get the complaint at 9 a.m. on a Monday morning, then by 5 p.m. on Monday evening, you should have done something to begin an investigation. If nothing else, you should have a written statement from the complainant, and it should be, in its own separate investigation file. You should have a list of people you want to talk to. You should know what their shifts are. Imagine that you work in a huge, here in Delaware, we process a lot of chickens. So what if you work in a huge chicken processing plant that runs 3 shifts a day? Well, you should have a list of the shifts that each of those people works so that you know when you can meet with them. Take a look at their vacation days. Are they going to be available? You know, there's a lot of groundwork that you can lay immediately, even if you can't start talking to people. Okay, timing is essential, but be thorough. As much as I want you to start this investigation right away, you can't be sloppy. You need to really dig in deep and, you know, find out every allegation that this complainant is making. You want to ask them every single time they felt harassed. And then you want to ask them for the names of every single person who was a witness to that harassment. And then you want to speak with every person on that list of witnesses. It's not just, you know, the complainant and the alleged harasser. You want to talk to everybody. Don't stop talking to people when all of the stories line up, because if you interview 5 out of 6 witnesses and you don't interview the 6th person and you get sued, I can guarantee you the 6th person is going to be the one who tells you a different story. You know, I have had clients tell me, well, we didn't interview the 6th person because, you know, she's a really big problem here and we know that she counseled the complainant to file this complaint. We know she's the reason that we have this complaint of harassment. I don't care. I want you to have a written statement, and if it corroborates the complainant's, you know, allegations, then that's the reality. But you need to know the truth to the best of your ability, because, you know, you can ignore it now and say, oh, that person isn't reliable, but Ray is not going to ignore that person, and the judge is not going to ignore that person. So, you know, you need to know what the answer is going to be. So document everything. Your best defense is going to be to say, you know, yes, all of those things may have happened. Maybe Bob in accounting told 50 dirty jokes to poor Sally, but we investigated everything. And here, by the way, are the 20 pages of written notes that our human resources manager kept on this investigation. She got written statements from every witness, and every witness, you know, denies knowledge about this. Those sorts of contemporaneous facts at the time of the allegation and not afterwards are so valuable, and very, very few of my clients keep those kinds of records. The very last thing you need to do is follow up with the complainant. This is, in my opinion, in avoiding a charge of discrimination from a good employee. Our natural instinct as human resources professionals is to keep confidentiality. So, you know, our policy is always, we don't discuss the discipline of one employee with another. If that is not your policy, it should be your policy, by the way. But, you know, that's our default mechanism, is we don't talk about discipline. This is a slight exception. You need to follow up with the complainant, and you need to say to her or him, you know, here's what you alleged, here's what we did to investigate, and tell them clearly, we substantiated or we were not able to substantiate your allegations, and here's why. You know, you gave us the names of 6 witnesses, none of them, you know, you know, the Bob telling the dirty joke that you said he told. And then if you do substantiate the allegation, explain what's going to happen. You know, we will be taking appropriate action. You don't need to know the accuser exactly what's going to happen. You know, Bob's getting a 6-day suspension because this is the 3rd time he's done this in the last 6 months. Just say that it's going to be a problem for us in a lawsuit. But do tell her, you know, we're taking approach to make sure this happens again.
Hey,
and
Lauren.
then, yep.
Came in quickly that clarifies something you stated earlier. When you said a written statement, you mean does that equate to a typed and signed, some of the documents typed and signed by the interviewee?
That is the best of all possible worlds. I love when my clients have typed statements that have a date and a signature on them, just because, you know, it makes it really easy to identify things. But it's not necessary. If your accuser, for example, sends you an email and says, you know, I've had it up to here, I can't take this anymore, you know, Bob in accounting keeps telling these inappropriate jokes, that is a written statement. Now you want to follow up with the person and say, is there anything else? Please tell me every time accounting told an inappropriate joke. Please tell me every time that you were asked out on a date, you know, if it's, you know, that type of harassment. Follow up, and then maybe ask for a second written statement. But be flexible, because under the law, there's no requirement that an employee give you a written complaint or that a witness give you a written statement. So, sometimes you're going to have somebody who refuses to do it. And when that happens, you still have to investigate the allegations to the best of your ability. And what you do as a human resources professional, or as what you instruct your staff to do if you're in-house counsel or the CHRO, is that if somebody won't give you a written statement, you write the statement yourself. So, write a note to file. On June 5th of 2015, I met with Sally. She at Bob in Accounting has been engaged in a protracted course of sexual harassment over the last 3 years. Following are the allegations that she gave me. You can't always guarantee a written statement, but get what you can is what I would say.
Great.
Yep. Okay, so follow with complainant. As I said at the beginning, an employee who feels that they have been heard and that they've gotten a fair shake is less likely to file a lawsuit. So that's what you want. Okay, your third line of defense is training. This is sort of, what we've been talking about, or what the article I wrote was all about, and we're just now getting to it. But it's because it is in support of everything else that you do to protect your company. But the very most important thing, about training is you can't defend against a harassment claim that you now hear about. When you have the supervisor and the subordinate that I talked about earlier, out for a drink on a Friday night after seeing 50 Shades of Grey, sloshed on Cosmos and complaining about Bob in Accounting, poor Bob in Accounting, by the way, when you have that scenario and nobody tells you about it, that is when you get in trouble. So that is the value of training. Train annually if possible. Be proactive. Do not be Lorelai Gilmore. Do not say, we've received a complaint that somebody, is touching somebody else inappropriately. Don't do that. You want to be proactive. We train, in order to enforce the provisions of our anti-harassment policy. We train managers and subordinates. We train everyone. The CEO needs to have a signed statement that they attended anti-harassment training. Because, as I said, it's your managers that lead to liability, so it doesn't matter that it's a high manager. It doesn't matter that it's somebody who should have the common sense to do the right thing. Everybody should be going through this training. And it should
Lauren,
be...
Yeah, and if we can just go a little bit deeper on that. So I know that a lot of the companies and the representatives who are on the webinar today, that's probably not their practice today. They approach anti-harassment training at the manager and supervisor level exclusively. Can you talk a little bit more about why that is potentially problematic, and maybe if you can take a guess at why it is that became standard practice to begin with, to focus just on the manager or supervisor level?
Sure. Well, let's start with the second question first, which is why that's standard practice. And I think that it's probably feasibility. I have a lot of very, very large clients, and what they would say to me is, it would take me the better part of a year, Lauren, to get all 2,000 of my, factory staff, into a meeting with you, just because we're working shift work. I'd have to shut down for an entire night so that you could train my night crew. I don't want to have to deal with that. I don't want to have to deal with the expense of having you come down here 15 times to do the training. And more than all of those things combined, by the time that I'm done training them the first time, you're going to have to start training them again because I'm telling them, do this annually if you can. So I think a lot of it is just feasibility. What I would say in response to that, I think that this is problematic, is again, that if your employees don't know that they have to report, then you can't require them to do it. So one of the things that I will probably run out of time to talk about is a line of cases called Farragher-Ellers. And those cases say that it is an affirmative defense of an employer that it has a valid anti-harassment policy in place, that it followed that anti-harassment policy, and that either the employee failed to report the alleged harassment, or that, you know, they did report it, you investigated it, and it stopped. Both of those things are an automatic out from liability, but they are completely destroyed if your employee doesn't know that they had a requirement to report the issue. So if your policy does not say employees must report harassment, and if you don't train employees that they must report harassment, you lose the benefit of this line of cases of Farragher-Ellers.
And Lauren, let me just jump in. We sort of, one of the questions while you're talking about this that came in relates to, because you mentioned that the CEO himself or herself needs to complete and have signed off on the program. And then the following, the question that came in is, gosh, we have a really hard time getting C-level to take this seriously, much less take the program. And I wanted to sort of anecdotally say that at LawRoom, we're the leading provider for colleges and universities. And the hardest thing we have to tackle is that we'll train probably 1 million students just in 2015 on harassment, diversity, substance abuse, but in the legislation as it relates to colleges and universities and Title IX funded institutions is that the faculty and staff have to complete the programs as well. And so if you think C-level is hard to get, try getting a tenured faculty member to take a program on sexual violence or sexual harassment. Like it is pulling teeth. But these institutions know that their Title IX funding is at risk, and so we always are dealing with the reality that the policy needs to be enforced, and it's not going to be well received by everyone. But gosh, is it important that it happens?
Yeah, I mean, that comment is completely consistent with what I hear from my clients. Most of my relationships are with human resources managers. It's rare that somebody, you know, in the upper echelons of management is, you know, the point person on human resources issues. We do occasionally have, you know, clients that have a chief human resources officer in place, but sometimes even those individuals feel like they're second-class citizens when compared with the COO and the CIO and other people that, you know, are somehow viewed to have like a more legitimate role. I don't understand, because, you know, you get a lot more liability and you're, you know, much greater exposure if you mismanage your human resources than you are if you mismanage your technology in most cases. But for some reason still they feel like second-class citizens. What I would suggest to combat that is to look for allies. I'm constantly telling my human resources clients, my human resources managers, blame it on me. Tell the CEO that I, as outside counsel, you know, am you know, saying X, Y, or Z. Sometimes having, you know, an attorney give your CEO a doomsday scenario really can be effective, and so, you know, you're doing your job by recruiting allies to fight the battle. That's one way that has been, you know, one method that's been effective for us.
And let me jump in. I know we're running pretty low on time, and there's a lot we want to cover still. You mentioned when I asked the question about why just managers and supervisors, you addressed, I think rightfully so, the logistics aspect, the cost aspect of getting, you know, if you have manufacturer, you know, and you have field workers, you have to get them all into a room at some point, and that's a big undertaking, especially if your locations are spread out across the state or certainly across the country. What is your perspective or thoughts? And certainly this is a self-serving question for me, but I'm curious nonetheless. What are your thoughts on online training, understanding that for some institutions and organizations it may be the only way, just given their complexity?
Yeah, if that is the only thing you can, then it's, you know, a great opportunity. First of all, it's, you know, there's guarantees that there is you know, some record of the person having been trained. So, you know, you've got like a timestamp or an email or something that indicates this person appeared for this online training and participated. What I think you can do as an employer is just to augment that in a couple of ways. You know, I think that there are, you know, are things you can do to really put online training neck and neck with an in-person training. the first thing I would say is make sure there's a manager in the room with those employees to make sure they're paying attention, because we don't want them surfing Facebook while they are supposed to be, getting very important training. That will come up in a deposition and it will look bad for you. And second, they should be informed that if they have any questions or if they have any complaints of harassment after they have attended this training, that they should speak to the following individual, and you name that individual. And that way, you don't lose the multi-dimensional interactions that happen when you have a live trainer in the room. People can ask questions. They can, really be held responsible for the subject of this training that way, because they can't say, well, I had to do the training, but it was a bunch of legalese. I didn't understand it. I didn't know what my responsibilities were. Well, if you had questions, you were told you should speak to the CHRO. Why didn't you do that? Well, I don't know. Well, didn't you? I mean, there's a signature page right here that, where you signed off and said you understood that was, the next step. Why didn't you do it? Well, I don't know. So those are ways that, both you can enhance the interactive nature of online training, and also they make it a really great defense tool if you do find yourself being sued.
Yeah, and I think, Lauren, that brings this full circle from how we started when we talked about anti-harassment to be taken seriously. And the notion that unfortunately, both in-person training and online training can be delivered in a way that's qualitatively so low, or the effort is so low that it continues to have the stigma of being a joke, and it's perceived by your workforce as not being taken seriously by the C-suite, by HR, et cetera. And I think, to piggyback on your statement, is that there's certainly people who do in-person training and it's not very good, and there's certainly online isn't very good, but the converse is that there's quality versions of both, and if it matters to your organization, you have to find the right ones.
Absolutely, and bad training is just bad news, both because it gives out inaccurate information sometimes, because then if your employees, go to 3, they're checking out for the 4th. You could bring in, I don't know who, John, do your training, and he can, go through all of the WWF wrestling moves, with pyrotechnics behind him, and you're going to have a hard time recapturing your audience after a string of bad trainings.
Yeah. Yep. Well, I want to be, so we have about, we'll say we'll run 2 minutes over, so I want to give you an opportunity to wrap up before we do a sort of a closing wrap up. So I know we probably have more slides to go, but I want to be respectful of time.
I will be super quick. So training is going to rehash a lot of the things that I have already discussed. What do we address our subordinates in training? First, we tell them what is harassment and what is not. Susie in accounting, stop complaining because your manager is disciplining you. That is not harassment. Obviously we won't be so specific with Susie, but that's something that they need to learn. You need to make sure that they understand the full range of harassment, all of the reasons, all of the protected characteristics, but also all of the ways in which it can happen. It can be verbal and nonverbal. Having a manager leer at you can be harassing. It can happen outside of the office. If you have company-sponsored picnics every year and you have one, senior level manager who gets drunk and, starts grabbing all the young girls, it doesn't matter that's out of the office. It's still harassment. And finally, your employees can be harassed by non-employees. So if you run a Verizon wireless store and one of your employees keeps coming in and making eyes at the young women, that's an issue. And those women should know about it. They should know that they have a right to be protected. And again, make sure that employees understand that they are obligated, they have a duty to report anything that they see or that they are the victim of. Okay, and then teach them what the investigation process is going to be, so that they really understand what's happening behind the scenes. You don't want them to think that you're ignoring them. Managers get everything the subordinates get plus. They need to really understand that if they don't share complaints that are made by their employees, there is major liability on the line. They should have the fear of God put into them over this. They never, ever let it go. Frequently, we have particularly young women come in and say, Auburn Accounting's asking me out every week. It makes me real uncomfortable, but I don't want you to do anything about it, because they don't want somebody to get in trouble. Well, I don't care if you don't want somebody to get in trouble. I am going to investigate this and I'm going to put a stop to it because I have a legal obligation to do so. What makes your employee comfortable, you know, in the moment doesn't matter. You have an obligation to stop harassment. Managers need to know that. They also need to know that they will be disciplined up to termination if they fail to report a claim of harassment that's brought to them. Okay. And finally, you know, again, a place where employees can really bring a value added. You need to make sure that the C-level managers that we talked about earlier know what the result of this training is going to be. You may absolutely experience an increase in complaints because people know their rights now. Train your stakeholders that an increase in complaints is good. Get off this teleconference, go tell your CEO, we really need some training, we haven't done it in 5 years. And by the way, that lawyer on the phone said that we're going to see an increase in complaints, and that's a great thing. Can you believe it? Isn't that crazy? But you've planted the seed. Make sure that they know that this is not a failure of the Human Resources Department. That is a success. And we're working, you know, at a grassroots level to change the culture at your company. That's a good thing. Okay, we talked about Farragher-Ellers. The one thing I want to hammer home at the end is that, you know, weak policies and bad investigations create liability because it makes it look like your company doesn't care. That is the last thing you want the EEOC or a judge to think when they look at your case. These guys didn't even care. They didn't bother to interview half the witnesses. That's bad news. So, you know, it's almost better not to do anything than to do it poorly and look like you didn't take this seriously.
Not to say you shouldn't do anything, but I point.
No. Please. My point is just do it well, do it right. Almost better to not do anything, but it's not really better. Don't take that approach. So, you know, at this point, I have managed to ruin everybody's fun and not given them, you know, any positive options, but you know, just as a way of very quick wrap up, do encourage your employees to be friends. Do encourage positive interactions. Just watch the tenor. Nobody should be telling a joke that starts with a priest, a rabbi, and an imam walk into a bar. That is going to get you in trouble, and the EEOC does not care that you think that America is too politically correct right now. They are going to come after you. So listen to that joke, pull Bob in accounting aside and say, Bob, knock it off. Tell a joke about a frog for the love of God, but stop talking about religious figures. And there you have it.
Awesome. Well, hey Lauren, I want to say thank you for spending an hour with us today. This is awesome, and I hope we had a great turnout. So I want to, when you joined, just to recap a few things. If you look at the chat box in the right-hand side of the control panel, you'll find a link to Lauren's contact information at her law firm, and you're welcome to reach out to her. Also in that is a link to more information about LawRoom's online anti-harassment training program that takes all of about 60 seconds to look at, so I encourage everyone to take a look at that as well. You know, as a quick sort of summary of LawRoom in 30 seconds, you know, for us, we provide conduct training for about 2,000 organizations, about 500 colleges and universities, varying in size from 50 employees to 50,000 employees. And what resonates for me in line with what Lauren has presented on today is that different strategies can be applied to different organizations, you know, for varying reasons. And if you talk to our sales organization here at LawRoom, for example, they would say there are certain companies that fit our ideal profile because they have workers who are sitting in front of a computer who are able to take online training. They have an HR and C-level leadership who actually care qualitatively about harassment training or data security training or Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, whatever the conduct is. And I bring that up because we know that every business is unique, but we also know that the effort is really important here, right? It's really important to have a strategy that is committed to at the C-level, that is pushed down throughout the organization, that reaches every single employee, and how you go about doing that may you know, the resource you use to go about doing that is going to be influenced by the type of business you have, the number of locations you have, the types of employees you have, et cetera. And so at LawRoom, a company that is in the business of providing online compliance training, we know that there's, you know, half of the businesses out there aren't a good fit for us. And many of the companies that are online today, that are on the webinar, may not be good fits for us. But we stand by Lauren in the assertion that quality matters to be taken seriously and needs to be dealt with seriously, whether that's using a vendor like LawRoom or doing it on your own or bringing in a culture like Lauren. You know, all of those are awesome, but you need to take the evaluation seriously in terms of which approach is going to be best for your organization. So with that, again, Lauren, thank you so much for the time today.
It's been a pleasure. I really, really appreciate the opportunity.
I may ask you to do it again in a couple of months, so I hope you had a good time.
Good.
For those that are still on, the webinar recording will be in your inbox tomorrow. Lauren's slide deck will be in your inbox tomorrow. If you want to take a look at a 60-second overview of why LawRoom's online training, anti-harassment in particular, is so amazing, you can click on the YouTube link that's in the chat box on the sidebar. And we'd love to talk to you. We'd love to learn more about what your approach is going to be. If you have a manufacturing company and you plan on having 3 events out throughout the year and you're going to bring in an outside speaker, might even love helping out to the extent possible. So with that, I'll shut it down. There's a few questions we didn't get to. I'll share those with Lauren. We will address those offline. If you have questions now, I'll leave this up for another couple of minutes. You're welcome to submit those, and we'll certainly address those offline as well. With that,